All right. Hi, everybody. Today is July 30th, and we will be looking over our agenda. We only have one item on the proposed agenda, which is a issue 1523 against the Operator Lifecycle Manager repo. I'll present that now, and if everybody can take a second just to look at that issue so we know what we're talking about. Okay, so this, can everybody see the issue? Great. So this issue is related to the bundle extract size limit. It looks like somebody added this to the agenda. Does the person who added it want to talk about it?
Yeah, that was me. I can sort of quickly give a summary. So this affects a couple of teams in my lab who have been working on operators. We have fairly large CRD definitions, and we have operators that manage a very large number of CRDs, some internal, some external, and we are bumping over the 1 meg limit, which prevents the operator from being installed because it copies the manifests into a config map. It won't let us go over that 1 meg limit. So I guess so I put on the agenda just really to ask for advice for, how are we supposed to handle larger bundle sizes? Like does this approach of the whole manifest get copied into a single config map, is that the only way we can sort of work with this, or are there alternatives?
Yeah, that seems like weird because if you're going to have a bundle that has all sorts of different stuff in it, it seems like a real limitation if you're going to copy all that information into a config map. Seems like you definitely have to separate that out.
Yeah, tonight.
Sounds like we're in Helm hell again.
This is Nick. To my memory, we have essentially sharding for when multiple bundles are resolved for an install plan. So when you have an install plan, it's something similar. All the stuff is written to a single resource and applied, and that can easily exceed the 1 meg limit. But what we did was we swapped out inline manifests for basically pointers to separate config maps that held the or at least references to bundles that would apply those specific resources. And this was the next thing that I was thinking about, was sharding for individual bundles. So it's definitely something we've thought about before. We didn't think it was something that you would bump into with a single bundle so quickly, unless they're really big bundles.
So for now, because we released our operator in July, for now I converted the YAML to JSON and minified it, got rid of all the white space in it, and I managed to scrape under the 1 meg limit. So I've bought myself a bit of time, but that isn't a great long-term solution. So is this something that you think is likely to be fixed, or is it in the plan to be fixed?
I mean, I think this seems like a real issue, and it's definitely something that we should probably come up with some different ideas on how to solve. That being said, I don't know that we've actively spent more than just like a few minutes talking about potential solutions for it. So we would have to basically go and come up with a design for how we would want to solve this problem, and then go and implement it.
Understood. And if there's any suggestions on what else we could be, I mean, so one approach we've tried is sort of minifying our YAML. Another thing that another team, another IBM product I'm aware of, did was essentially just remove the documentation from the CRD. They stripped out all their descriptions. that's not an approach I'm fond of, but I can see why they did it. So, but is there a smarter way than those two workarounds we've used? That, you know, is there another thing we can do other than asking you guys to make changes?
I think there's an interesting option you might have. Sorry, this is Evan. That you might have for 4.6 onwards. So I guess that's OLM 0.16 and onwards, or 0.15 and onwards, if I remember. Because you can specify dependencies on particular packages and particular versions. So what you could do is essentially split up your one operator into multiple bundles and have them all depend on their exact other related versions. And then OLM would pick a set of bundles and apply them all at once.
So could we have a bundle that was
work
purely a way of packaging CRDs and didn't actually have an operator in there?
I think in theory, there's no reason we can't do that. In practice, there's lots of validation everywhere that would raise some alarms. So you might need to put some of these with like pause containers or something just to split it. We're just talking about workarounds, not ideal scenarios.
Are you using the related images part of that yet? Are you using the images in the CSV?
This was before we'd added that, actually. We hit this.
Well, yeah, definitely after you do that.
Yeah.
so luckily, related images right now is only needed for air gap. Because you're not using OLM for the air gap part yet, we could probably delay that. So that buys a little bit more time there too.
Well, so totally, I wasn't expecting us to sort of fix it on this call. I just sort of wanted to bring it to your attention and to raise it because it is blocking a couple of us. You know, well, not blocking. We found workarounds, but yeah, I just wanted to raise it as something that is concerning us.
I definitely understand, and we should do something to fix it. Well, I was kind of hoping that by the time anyone hit this problem, we would have some sort of like a provisional API object mechanism in Kubernetes that we could use and say, here's some proposed objects, but they're not approved yet, so don't actually store them under their standard etcd paths or something. Because that's kind of what we really want. We want all of these things to exist and have full access to the full etcd key value limit for size, and just not have them appear in the cluster for real. So there are solutions we could work on the OLM side to enable something along those lines. We could write an API server that does that, or varying degrees of sharding across other resources. But it does. I do wonder if maybe this is something we could potentially find a solution for upstream.
If we want to solve this problem upstream, would that involve like writing an enhancement and linking this issue?
It would. We're probably to the point where we need to do some other form of sharding anyway, if we're already hitting limits like this. But we could definitely do that in parallel and start up the conversation and just see where we can go in Kubernetes.
Oh, I see what you're saying. When you say upstream, you don't mean like with our upstream community. You mean like this is more of a Kubernetes problem than just an OLM problem because of the size limit on a config map.
And the other way of looking at it is looking at why our CRDs are so big. There's a lot of duplication because it's where we have sort of components with a lot of repeated definitions. And I sort of put that in a comment there. You can see it in the bottom of the issue that, if CRD supported something like $ref, we could easily sort of dramatically reduce the size of our CRDs, but it's because we're very explicitly identifying every possible value that they grow very quickly.
That's an interesting option. It'd be interesting to see, because that's potentially inflation that OLM could do. So obviously CRDs right now don't support refs, but I think there is some discussion upstream about if or whether that could ever happen. But even if it doesn't ever happen upstream, we could potentially provide that as an inflation step for bundles when we apply them. So when we're
most
unpacked,
of our file size
yeah.
is in those open API definitions in the CRDs.
Just like they
Kind of step back from a design perspective. I just want to make sure I understand the implementation. So if I remember, if I'm understanding right, so OLM has the ability to use a config map as a bundle source, correct? And so is the problem that the contents of the bundle image are being jammed into a single config map?
So when we unpack, so what happens is when we install, when you install a bundle reference, in order to actually get that reference on cluster, we pull down the image as a and inject a binary in it to make it runnable, so that we can pull the contents of that bundle out. So we actually have the YAML used to apply to the cluster. When we do that, we basically, in order to persist it to the cluster so that we know what we're looking at, we stuff all that into a config map. So yeah, that's essentially how it works.
Yeah, I get your comment about sharding that config map, and that totally makes sense to me. Those are tricks that we were using in Helm world to be able to solve gigantic config map problems as well. So just related to that, so the config map, there is a config map store, right? A bundle store. I've seen that in the code. Is there a use case for that? Like a customer use case?
So you're talking about the catalog config map?
Yeah, that's what I'm talking about.
So that's like the original like the trivial implementation of catalogs before we had the operator registry project. Basically, that was just our way of like getting some content onto the cluster as sort of like a trivial bootstrap implementation. It still exists. I think it still kind of works, although it's not really up to date. And there's a lot of features that are since implemented by the registry that just don't exist for that config map type.
Okay, good. I just wanted to make sure I was confusing two different things. Good.
Yep.
Thank you.
No problem.
It's worth noting that there is a potential like not to cache it on cluster and to directly unpack and apply bundles from their container images. And one of the reasons we didn't do that up front was because in OpenShift we have a requirement that images be pulled through cry and cryo to get all sorts of proxying information applied to those pull specs before they hit the node. And it is useful in that platform to not have to re-implement all of those things, or like the ability to read those configs that specify those proxying and pull specs. So that's the reason why we use a pod spec to actually pull these images and don't pull it directly with OPM. And also part of the reason why we unpack to config maps.
So you're talking about taking advantage of the image content source policy and all that stuff that Creo exposes.
Exactly.
Yeah, I think the primary motivator for that too is actually the multi-arch stuff, because cryo in the background is just swapping things for us.
Got it. So I'm still confused a little bit how we go on. We still haven't really, in my opinion, closed on how do we deal with enhancements. Because we still have to have fundamental deep knowledge and committers essentially to be able to understand the inner workings of how this stuff works in order to be able to do enhancement requests. And so we started with the issue. And so I guess what we need is a champion to be able to help us create the enhancement requests so we can actually make progress on like a sharding feature or something like that.
That sounds like a great way to handle this type of thing. Can we do we have a volunteer to champion this and get it over the line with an enhancement, even if it's just an initial approach?
I'd like to take a crack at an enhancement for that. If nobody else wants to. This is Nick.
I mean, we are saying for this specific issue.
Yeah, for this one that we're discussing.
Yeah,
right
I
now.
can work on with Nick on this. That will be fun.
Great.
And then we should probably set like a soft deadline to at least review progress and see where that is. I would say maybe at the next one of these. Is it 1 week from now or 2 weeks from now? I don't remember.
It's
2 weeks from
bi-weekly.
now.
So I can,
Yeah.
I'll just generate the notes and stuff and add that as an item for our agenda.
Does that sound like enough time, or do you need more?
I think that's reasonable. Does this include the initial draft is like going to be a provisional description of the problem, borrowing a lot from this, and what we can do in OLM. I don't know how far we want to extend it into doing like provisional objects in Cube. If you have a thought on that, maybe we could get a better estimate. But the first part definitely.
Yeah, I definitely think let's focus on stuff we can do today for the enhancement. But it would be great if we could follow up with discussions both in OpenShift, because there's the discussion of how to share the image pool config between multiple components. That would also solve this problem. And then, yeah, upstream would be really great to just put some probes out and see.
Yeah, I would like to see if we can discuss, again, not today, of course, but about a long-term and short-term solution for this. Basically on what we can do now with OM and what we can introduce into upstream, or using some feature upstream that can be extendable in the future and so on. So it's just a timeline of what can be done now, can be done in the future, so to speak.
When we're championing this, it might be useful for us to send an email out to the OLM dev group and just host those, the meetings where we discuss the specifics of what we're going to implement publicly.
Yeah. So maybe I'm going. I think that's a good idea. I would like to mention that one of the things that we've been talking a lot over the last couple of weeks about how we can make development and conversation between dev and users a lot more or a lot less opaque. So one of the things that we've tried to do over the last couple of days is we opened up a pull request against the Kubernetes community to basically create some open Slack channels in the Kubernetes Slack. And then what our plan is to move all of our upstream dev conversation there. So it might be once that's merged and available, it might be a good spot to actually have the conversation there rather than just through the mailing list. Because I think, slightly more synchronous communication on something like this where it gets a little bit complicated might be a better forum. But certainly until that exists, the mailing list is probably the best place.
Mm-hmm. Agreed. Okay, well, if we're going to carry that on off list, I don't think we actually have any other items on our agenda. Is there anything else we want to discuss?
I guess I'll mention a PSA of an issue that I'm looking into right now. It appears that some of the OPM releases, or I should say the operator registry image releases that are both on Quay for OpenShift Origin and on registry.redhat.io seem to have invalid OPMs. They don't indicate what commit they were built from, which suggests an issue with the downstream build. And they have fairly subtle bugs that I don't think we've seen in any of our upstream releases in terms of building registries. So I'm still looking into what could be causing that. I'm not sure where the discrepancy between our current upstream builds and the downstream builds are. This PSA, if you're using the OPMs from the downstream images, not sure what the best solution there is. The 4.6 provisional images, those do seem to work, as far as I can tell. So if that's an option, updating to the 4.6 version is good while we try and track down what happened with the downstream builds.
Yeah, I guess what we're looking for, so I'm assuming you're talking, this is Chris, I'm assuming you're talking about the fun that we're dealing with over the past 24 hours. So the,
Yes.
yeah, so what we need is we need to be able to build a functional registry catalog that works on both OCP 4.4 and 4.5. And so I just need advice on which one we should use. And so we were going to try to use the downstream ones because those are supported, in quotes. And so if those are not, if those are going to be, and we have products that are imminently trying to release like today, tomorrow. And so we're trying to figure out what is the best version of OPM to try to use.
I mean, if it's an option using the pre-release 4.6 ones, we can double check, but operator registry is backwards compatible. I don't think we haven't knowingly broken anything, and we are intentionally backwards compatible. So I believe that building with 4.6 will work fine. We should test and double check.
I believe that you're right, Evan. One thing that we should point out though is that we are backwards compatible in that the registry images that are newer will work against older clusters, but that is not necessarily the same in reverse. So a newer cluster, for example, might be doing things like querying for fields that aren't yet available in an older version of the registry, unless you start that registry image with a newer base, right? Basically, if you like rebuild it using OPM but without adding anything, you can like have a new version. But like I said, it doesn't work both directions.
So could we? Oh, this is interesting. So, if a new version of OPM comes out or a new version of OCP comes out, a downstream version, should we rebuild our entire catalog from scratch? Re-add all the bundles to make sure everything is built properly, versus trying to just add new bundles to that existing image?
Well, no, you shouldn't.
Be able to swap the. Yeah, sorry. Go ahead.
Yeah. I think Evan and I were about to say the same thing. You should be able to just look at your existing 4.5 image and then migrate it to 4.6 by adding another bundle to it using the latest version of OPM. That should automatically migrate the database to the latest version, and it should just work against 4.6. You won't need to rebuild from scratch.
Well, the thing I'm concerned about is like the bug that Evan is looking at right now appears to have corrupted the database. So in that particular case, so I don't know if the bug is that the registry server is just not serving things correctly out of the database, or the database actually got corrupted. So in this particular case, we might have to actually rebuild all of our catalogs to resolve the corruption, because the graph might have been screwed up too, right? So it all depends, I think, on what happened from version to version, right?
No, go. I think the intention of the project is to not introduce any bugs like that. If that happened, then we probably need to go and look at what exactly is going on, and then see if we can try to find some mitigation for it. If it's truly just corrupted, I mean, I would be a little bit surprised if that was the case. I think much more likely there's some small issue that we should be able to migrate forwards. Although, like I said, that does depend on like what we end up triaging and finding out in that particular case.
Yeah. Also, if you have the previous digests on for the older images and you keep them, the older versions of your index, you can bisect hopefully where the issue was introduced and then just replay the bundle additions after that with a newer OPM.
Yep.
I'm just struggling. We're running into all sorts of little weird things where there's incompatibilities, and I know it's probably just a historical thing on things being relatively new. So I just want to make sure I'm playing this back right. So every single time a new version of OPM comes out, if we want to support, well, essentially every time a version of downstream OPM comes out, we would definitely want to touch all of our indexes, right? If we're not introducing a new bundle for whatever reason, we'd at least want to touch it somehow to convert it to the newer version so it could be consumed by that equivalent version of OCP, right? Because we want that image that it would be consuming, that latest version, to be compatible with that, so any new fields could be resolved and so forth. So that migration step would have happened. So that would have to happen, correct?
Yeah, that would have to happen for bumping up to the new version if there are changes that are important. The nice thing, so there's a couple ways you can sort of manage the change though. One thing you can do is just have those images, bump them up, and because they're backwards compatible, you can continue to run those images on the previous releases of OpenShift and OLM if you choose to. That's one approach, and that's why the registry is backwards compatible. What OpenShift is doing as a product, they're building new indexes from scratch for each release of OpenShift, each minor release of OpenShift, and then choosing whether or not to carry content forward from the previous release, and manually moving the content over to the new release, more similar to how you do for an OS release bump.
Yeah, we're trying not to do that. We're trying to have one master catalog that would work with all releases. And at the moment, we would just have something in the release notes that indicate, what versions of OpenShift has been tested on. And I know you're using catalogs, one per release, minor release, and we're trying to avoid that. So is that a mistake? Or can we continue down having like a latest tag that just simply has the latest version that would work, on older versions of OpenShift and the newer versions? Because you said it was backward compatible. I just want to make sure that we're still following the the correct path.
Yeah, I don't want to tell you that you'll never need to deal with migration steps here, because even if we never have to make a breaking change, first off, if we do make a breaking change to operator registry, that'll be something we communicate far in advance. But if we ever do need to make, even if we never do need to make one, Kubernetes and OpenShift change relatively significantly between minor releases. So in particular, for example, Kubernetes 1.22 is the planned deprecation of v1 beta 1 CRDs, which means that any content that you have in a catalog matching that has a v1 beta 1 CRD in it will fail to deploy. So there are definitely, I feel that there are enough concerns between minor releases within a window of, say, like 4 minor releases that you'll need to eventually think about having multiple indexes or deprecating content or something along those lines.
Well, shouldn't the API have that capability of determining compatibility rather than have to have a lot of different indexes? It seems they should have a unified index and just the API to be able to filter out the things that you're interested in. Like, don't show me stuff that's not compatible because it doesn't have the v1 beta 1 anymore.
Yeah, there's definitely, we'll try and do as much of that as possible. And that's what some of there's definitely a set of features in OLM to help with that. I don't know that that's going to cover all the cases, right? But we don't control the upstream Kubernetes release cycle. And so we don't necessarily know what's coming far enough ahead of time to plan for it.
Yeah, but we do have the facility to have at least foundational, like API availability, so you can have runtime capabilities, right? To know when APIs are available.
Yes.
There's there's a bar for the common kinds of stuff, right? There's things that you don't know because they're outside of the Kubernetes realm. And so I'm just thinking you should have, something that has, first class support for at least API versions, queryable feature versions, that kind of stuff.
Yeah, we do. So the right now, the best thing we have is the native APIs specification for operators. So you can declare essentially all the APIs that you're using, and then OLM will prevent installation if those aren't there.
Yep.
I mean, I think there's way more we can do, but that's all we have so far today. So I just want to. I'm not saying that it's a bad strategy to have one image that you're supporting across multiple versions. We've been doing that with with OpenShift 4.1 to 4.5, all share the same catalog data. But what's happening is we're continuing to add new features and things to bundles and all that. But because that content shows up on 4.1 or 4.2, a lot of the people shipping into the catalog can't take advantage of that because it won't work on those older clusters.
It's also kind of interesting because in general, in Kubernetes, tags are kind of frowned upon. The advice for at least pods and applications is that you're using a digest. Now this is something that's like different, but for catalogs, if you're shipping whole clusters out, I would expect you to use a digest for the catalog and some sort of like external configuration to apply that update out to clusters after you've vetted the content.
Yeah, what we're doing is we're going to use unique tags that are chronologically in order, so we can know what the latest is for each of those catalog repos. And so that when like for an air gap environment, the customer can go ahead and we have a script essentially that helps them synchronize the correct catalog into their local repo, their local registries without accidentally backleveling it. And then so the catalog source always points to latest, but then it's just how you're vetting out those catalog images kind of controls that. So the idea is we configure the cluster once, have a catalog source pointing to their local latest or online latest, and then we just make sure that that latest is really latest. Does it make sense?
That makes sense. Yeah, I'm just trying to reconcile in my head the like issues you run into when you have a single index that multiple clusters at different versions are using, and also trying to reconcile whether it makes sense to put the onus on OLM to figure out those features, or figure out those compatibilities or not in your catalog, and then proactively hide them or not allow them to be installed.
Seems like having a lot of different catalogs just pushes the problem someplace else. Because it seems like the metadata for understanding that catalog should be an OLM, because it's the one who's got the fundamental API to be able to query that information, because all the metadata is there. Having to push that outside means I have to have all of that same logic elsewhere. And then I have to create, potentially thousands of catalogs for all the different combinations of things.
That
I don't disagree that it's pushing the problem elsewhere. I'm just trying to think about it more deeply in terms of like, are there different classes of incompatibilities that it would be very complex to push it into OLM and may make sense being in, somebody's CI infrastructure instead.
Yeah, I guess I don't know any scenario yet. You have to talk me out of that, but so far it seems like, API versions, CRD capability. Of course, there's gonna be new features and stuff that we haven't even invented yet that you can't take advantage of, but it seems like all that could be modeled.
I think I would also like to point out that like over time, like I think one of the things to consider is that over time, as you start putting more and more and more and more of these manifests in the same catalog image, it's going to start getting big. And to be fair, like when we moved to indexes, we simplified a lot of things. But even just the metadata around the graph, it's going to grow. And having 10,000 versions of operators, but only 1,000 of them can actually be installed in a cluster, and still downloading all that metadata when, in all honesty, your cluster is just like never going to use it, feels to me a little wasteful from a customer perspective.
Thinking about it, what is the catalog index image? It's an index, right? And so when you have an index, you create a lot of information that can be queried simply, right? So even though it might be in the image, it doesn't necessarily mean it's stored inefficiently, right? So you could put the burden on OPM, to be able to scrape the right pieces of information out, right, and put it in an organized fashion. And
yeah,
I guess you just you defer it to the bundle, right? So I don't have it, so I gotta go look in the bundle to see if it really had it. So maybe you get it down to, oh yeah, I've got like 8 bundles or 8 channels that look like it might do it. Then I could query them and see, this version of the catalog doesn't have this information yet. So now I go ahead and grab the bundle and see if it's compatible or not. And there's lots of ways you can do that.
Yeah, I think you're describing something that we've been trying to do to a degree, and I think we can definitely continue to add more things along those lines. One of the other ones we're really concerned about is knowing what the next cluster you're updating to, if you're updating a cluster, what will be available and what won't be available, and sort of alerting before you upgrade.
Yeah, exactly.
But I guess sort of stepping back a bit, the thing that I am concerned about is that, sure, it's an index of data for releases. I still think we will want cutoff points, and right now, neither Kubernetes nor OpenShift really have a concept of major releases. It's kind of a rolling minor release model right now, but eventually I think this is what Kevin was getting at. You'll be supporting so many of these that you'll want to start dropping old content, just like Rel 7 shares its packages between all of its minor and patch releases, and those get updated over time. But Rel 8 is an entirely new set of packages that have to be built and tagged in specifically. So even if it's not, so OpenShift went with that model for every minor release. That might not always be the case, and you certainly don't have to follow that model either. But I do think it's worth pointing out that there will probably be a time where that is something that you want to do for management's sake.
Yeah. So I've been thinking about that too. How the heck do we shard the catalog, in 2 years down the road from now? And I noticed that you recently, just yesterday, put in a PR for deprecating a bundle. So that's certainly going to help, right? Because that's going to actually remove things out of the catalog. Yeah, and the phone is aware. They added there's a new OPM command that allows you to deprecate a specific bundle version, which deprecates that and all the previous replaces. So that could be super useful.
Yeah, that's closely tied to the catalog strategy for OpenShift minor versions. So I mean, in some ways, it's a good thing. We'll be testing out a lot of the tooling and processes for how you would cut over. And we definitely, I know Nick sent out some docs a few weeks ago on the mailing list. We're definitely thinking about questions of, how do I chop up a catalog and combine it with another catalog. Layer on changes, that kind of thing.
Yep, that's good. I know you've got the prune functionality in there. Kind of need the opposite of that. You give me a subset, which I've got that curated catalog feature out there, which I've been sitting on for 3 months. But that's going to be really important for the air gap scenarios as we move forward there.
Is this a forum where we should talk about recent changes, like the deprecate feature?
I think that'd be great.
If that's what people want to talk about, I think that's fine.
We could probably add that permanently to every agenda.
Yeah, I mean, we could also talk about the resolver.
That'd probably be a really good idea, actually.
Yeah, I don't know. I don't know if 10 minutes is long enough. I guess this is more just. We recently, I guess, as of today, merged the new resolver into OLM, which is functionally equivalent to the old resolver for most cases right now. The one new thing you get is the ability to depend on a particular package and a particular version range of packages, which helps with some specific dependency scenarios. But the new resolver is a SAT-based a SAT solver-based dependency resolver, and we've done a lot of work to make it really flexible for future expansion. And so I think over the next couple of months, we'll be trying to make some strong improvements there and add more dependency features.
So I thought that was added to OPM a few weeks ago. Are you saying that the OLM part OLM also had to take advantage of that as well?
Yes, exactly. Yeah, nothing in OLM was respecting that until today.
I see. So is that going to be? Do you have any idea what OCP version that would manifest in?
4.6.
Okay. So that's important to know because if we start taking advantage of features in OPM, we definitely need to know what's going to be ignored. So, like for example, I'm pretty sure that the whole mode operate argument for skip semver skip range and all that kind of stuff. I'm pretty sure that's all agnostic of OLM, right?
Yes, it is.
Okay, so that's one good example. And then this other one, I guess we'll have to wait for OLM to have parity, which means that I'm assuming packages that we use the new dependency mechanism will not work on OCP 4.5.
If you have specified dependencies on package version ranges, that is true.
Correct. So that's another breaking change.
So
it's just a new feature. It's not a breaking change, right?
Well, okay. So if we have, well, it is a breaking change because if we have, so we're building lots and lots of interoperable operator graphs, right? So graphs of like Nate or Dale was talking about earlier. I mean, one of these cloud packs we have, have dozens of operators that have to interoperate. And so we're relying on the dependency resolution mechanism to be able to find the right ones. So if they're actually modeling this with the dependencies YAML, and now on 4.5, that dependencies YAML isn't used anymore, you're getting different versions, now customers are going to see a problem. The behavior
right, I guess
the two
I'm just saying that
different.
Specifying dependencies in that way was introduced for 4.6. So it would be weird for 4.5 to support that, right?
But I'm just saying OPM added it.
Yeah, OPM added the ability to add that to the database. It didn't actually do anything in 4.5, right? The only way your dependencies were defined in 4.5 was through required CRDs in the CSV, which the new resolver also still supports, right? So like if you've been defining dependencies through required CRDs in your CSV, 4.6 will still resolve those exactly the same way as it had been.
Yeah, I get that. Okay, this again is a really reason why we might have to have different catalogs per OCP version because they're going to work differently.
They'll only work differently if you only define your dependencies the old way. Yeah, so if you that's true. So if you're using a new catalog that doesn't have those dependencies defined at all, that is an issue because now you're only defining, like say if you only define your dependency on a package version and not on a CRD, then yes, the older version of OLM won't know how to resolve that thing. That is true.
So we need a way to identify that. So the only way I know of right now is having multiple catalog instances. So I think you're confirming that, correct?
Yeah, I mean, you would basically, well, so no, I mean, I do want to take another step back, which is that the new catalog, as long as as long as every single package still referenced the old method of defining dependencies, those will still work, right? It's only that, hey, we're introducing this new feature to say you can actually now define your dependencies in this new way. That won't work on older versions of OpenShift.
Exactly what I understand. Yep. So we have some components that are totally waiting for this. And so they're going to go ahead and they're going to want to use it, but they're going to have to conditionally use it based on the target OCP platform.
Yeah, I mean, I want to point out though that like this is true, but that's true of virtually any new feature that gets added to OLM, right? If we add some new feature that says, hey, now we support this set of manifests, that's not going to appear in an older version of OLM. It's not going to appear in an older version of OpenShift. It's only going to be available in the new version of OLM. So that's in that way, that's kind of why we're saying this is a new feature. It's not a backwards compatible breaking thing.
Yeah, I think I just need to keep it clear in my head that the client tool doesn't necessarily dictate what's available on the server, right? So we just have to be very careful on how we tie those together.
Yeah, I mean, I would recommend, like, if you're going to be shipping operators to multiple versions of OCP, testing against every version of OCP and making sure that those features actually work the way you're expecting them to.
Yeah, we're doing that anyway. I'm just,
Yeah.
Yeah, okay. Any other features I can freak out about?
Sorry for the crickets. I don't know about new features with respect to catalogs besides that are being introduced in 4.6 that you should be concerned about. No.
So what is the status of the CV less bundle? Is that still kind of being worked on, and from a design perspective?
Yeah, so that was, yeah, so that was basically put on hold. There's a bunch of conflicting feedback on the enhancement for it. From a user perspective, it's hard to see how much value it would add, which is why it's taken a backseat to other things, namely the dependency resolution and the operator API for 4.6. It doesn't mean we don't plan to do it. So I should be getting back around to it soon. But I can't put an exact date to that.
That sounds good.
We are at the top of the hour, so unless there's any really quick wins we can get, we should probably call the meeting shortly. Okay, I'm going to stop recording now.